I'm professor of psychology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. I am both a cognitive psychologist and a philosopher of psychology. And I've been studying the phenomenology of human consciousness, ordinary consciousness and also non-ordinary consciousness. And I've been working on thought processes, also on creativity, and on this phenomenon that we are aware. And it's a day-to-day happening, but the fact that we are aware is quite puzzling, it's quite mysterious. So I've been working on this for many years, but and I also like to travel in the world. I've traveled a lot. It was totally by coincidence that I got to this, traveling in South America, and getting to this, it occurred to me that what the subject matter here is consciousness. Because at the time, all the academic literature on ayahuasca was either in the natural sciences, botany, pharmacology, or in anthropology, because ayahuasca in the Amazonian tribal culture is the central of those indigenous cultures. So anthropologists have studied the music, the cosmology, the rituals. The top people was, for example, the Colombian anthropologist Geraldo Reichel Dolmatov is no longer alive. But the amazing thing is that the top experts on ayahuasca, the scientific experts, didn't have first-hand experience with it. And the topic was considered to be a topic of anthropology. Of the Amazon, of Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and also Brazil and Bolivia. And both the anthropologists and the ethnobotanists thought and wrote that those people see like serpents and jaguars and big birds, because this is the fantastic imagination of the primitive people. I came to ayahuasca not knowing anything of this literature, having no prior knowledge about Amazonian culture, but I saw the same things. I cannot say that I saw exactly the same thing. Nobody can take a picture of what is in your mind, but the same semantic categories. So I did see jaguars and serpents and amazing fabulous palaces made out of gold and precious stones. And these were when I read the anthropological literature, these are the same categories of things. And I was thinking, this is not the fantasy of primitive people. This is the mystery of human consciousness, human, not Indian, not Amazonian, human consciousness. So I thought two things. First, that the subject matter here is not anthropology. In other words, it's not the study of foreign civilizations, but the study of the human mind, which was my profession for already 25 years. And the second, I understood that one cannot understand what is going on here without trying it yourself. Because all these so-called the world expert on ayahuasca. Today the situation is different because there are young students of doctorate and with personal experience. But at that time, like 20 years ago, the top experts, the top academic experts, didn't have any personal experience with it. And I made the decision that if I want to understand what's going on, first of all, I have to go not as a researcher, but as a student, and to study it on myself. The situation was as if a person who has never heard music would write a book about music. Not a person who is not a composer, but a person who has never listened to music. Now this is ridiculous. So I went back to South America. I stayed there 2 years, mostly in Brazil and Peru, but also in Colombia and Ecuador. And I drank ayahuasca many times in different places, different geographical places, different ethnical groups, different kinds of rituals, both indigenous, mestizo, which means semi-indigenous, semi-Amazonian, semi-Christian, Catholic Brazilian churches that use ayahuasca as a sacrament. The drink is identical in all these places, but the rituals are different. And only after having taken it almost 70 times, I started to interview people. I was returning to the Amazon at least once a year since then, and I interviewed hundreds of people on their experience. And on the basis of all this data that I collected, I began writing this book, which is like a cartography of the experience. Not each time, but over many times and a great number of people, what kind of things can be seen. If I look at the large numbers of people and of sessions, so several categories are much more frequent than others, and they, regardless of whether the person is Indian or not. Serpents, this is the most common category. Feline, which means large cats, but not lions, either jaguars or pumas. Architecture, palaces, temples, but fantastic architecture, works of art, objects of magic, mythological creatures like half a human being, half an animal, celestial scenes like the heavens open and the angels are coming, or beings of light are coming. These are the most common. I should say, however, that I was fortunate to have powerful visions from the beginning. Only through my research I discovered that there are many people who don't see anything. So when I say the most common, this is of course the most common out of the people who see. If there are people who don't see, I cannot do statistics on that. Also people report, more common than either Africa or Asia, people report prehistorical animals. Quite a few. Essentially, there can be three lines of how to interpret this. One is involves like paranormal discovery. That this beverage makes people undergo a paranormal travel outside of space, outside time. This is what practically all the Indians believe, and also most Western people or non-Indian Brazilians, like from Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, who have had powerful experiences. This is so astonishing that people believe these other realities that exist somewhere, or other realities. I don't believe in paranormality. The other alternative is, like Jung, is that the deep layers of our own unconscious. This is offhand, a priori, it makes sense. However, I collected a large number of dreams. And with the same conceptual categorization, I counted what people see in dreams, in the dreams of everyday night. And it's completely different. In dreams, usually you see persons close to you, your father, your mother, your children, or little things that happened to you in the last day. Maybe you made a phone call and there was a number, and the number re-enters into the dream. Nothing of the sort you find in ayahuasca. So it led me to conclude that the unconscious, the way psychoanalysis conceives the unconscious to be, is also not the answer. So I came up, and this is kind of the original part of my book, with a third option, that it's creativity, that we create it. I came to this idea once during an ayahuasca session, and I was guided through an exhibition, like a museum. And the exhibition it was of an entire civilization. It contained works of art, objects of everyday use, architectural models, technology. And it was like a civilization I never saw ever, either in my travels or in books, in film, nothing. And the other thing I observed about this whole exhibition, that it was coherent. It was not like one thing looked Asian, one thing looked Egyptian, another thing looked futuristic. It was a coherent, complete civilization. And I was thinking to myself, either indeed I'm now kind of flying outside of space to some other reality. I don't believe in it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't believe in this. So the other logical option is that on the spot, my mind, not because I'm this particular individual, but because of the phenomenon, the amazing phenomenon of the human mind, my mind created a whole civilization on the spot. So I would say just as actually human beings were made to create culture. Like bees create honey, human beings create culture. Not every single human being is a creator of culture, but if God looks at this whole history of Homo sapiens, it made architecture, it made religion, it made philosophy, it made music. That's what humanity is. So with ayahuasca, but in actual life, you need very special, talented individuals. You need generations for it. With ayahuasca, it can happen. It doesn't happen to every person who drinks ayahuasca, but to many, it happens in a moment. The other thing that happens very commonly with ayahuasca, and it is special to ayahuasca, not to other substances, is it makes some people, not everybody, but many people, it happened to me personally, it makes people sing. The mouth opens, and there comes song. Melody, sometimes also with the text of the melody. When it happens, and it's a fantastic experience, that you sing like an opera singer. And this is special to ayahuasca. All of ayahuasca is, with the Indians, it's used for healing. And they say, el que can, in Spanish, el que canta, el que cura. He who sings is the one who cures, or the one who heals. And the healing is through the singing. They drink the ayahuasca, but the healing is the singing. And if you look at European languages, like Roman languages, French, Italian, Spanish, you say cantare and encantamento, singing and enchanting, and chant and enchantment is the same word. So, and really all the ayahuasca rituals, there's always music. Always music. The music can be different in different places, usually without instruments, some places with instruments, but there's always music. But I should say that I have my own view of what academic psychology should be. It's a minority view. I'm not the only one, but it's a minority view. But I developed this view before I knew ayahuasca. I wrote a book on the psychology of the philosophy of psychology, because all of academic modern psychology, coming from the United States, but also in the Netherlands, is based on the idea that the human mind is like an advanced computer, and all that we think, talking, every memory, perception is based on what is called underlying mental representations, which means symbolic structures inside the mind, and the application of computer-like operations upon these structures. And I think the method of the human beings are not primarily designed to process information like a computer, but rather to act in the world. And the method to study this, to my mind, which comes from the continental Europe, not from the America, is phenomenology. Looking at large pieces of behavior, for me the behavior I studied was language. So looking at language and not asking what is the computations there, but what are the regularities in the phenomenology of language. Afterwards I applied this to internal monologues, like you have, everybody has it every day. All of a sudden, you have like conversation going silently, of course, inside your head. You're not speaking, but there are sentences running in your head. So I collect first my own, then I collect this also from hundreds of people, and I try to build kind of a grammar of those internal conversations. And I found, I'm not a clinical psychologist, I don't care about the content, but I look at the grammar, at the structure of that, and there are regular patterns. Later, with the same technique, I studied images. Images don't come usually spontaneously, so I asked people to close their eyes and let go and report the images that go. So using these techniques that I developed before I even heard about ayahuasca, I took these phenomenological techniques and applied them to ayahuasca. Yeah. And this is my study was the first and still the only academic cognitive psychological study of ayahuasca. There have been studies, neuropsychological studies of ayahuasca, medical psychology to see if people become healthier, psychologically healthier with ayahuasca. This is not my line of research. My line was to see what is happening from a cognitive point of view. What is happening? It shows us other parts or other qualities of the mind that usually as scientists we don't think of if we look only at ordinary states of consciousness. Like my book, the idea of this came from Aldous Huxley. Who was an intellectual, a writer who took mescaline and then wrote two essays that came afterwards, which was published together, Heaven and Hell. Dose of Perception is more a personal account of his own mescaline experience in one day, and the Heaven and Hell is more of a intellectual, philosophical, literary criticism, reflections after that. So they go together, these two. He took mescaline when he was 59. It was 3 years after he published the Perennial Wisdom. Yeah, he was not a 20 years old boy. And Heaven and Hell, he begins to say that like in geography, first people knew Asia, the Middle East, the Northern Africa and Europe, and then they discovered America, and then West America, and South America, and in Australia. The same with the mind. First we know only our waking normal consciousness. Then we discover our dreams, regular dreams. And then if we go far away to after the oceans of the mind, we discover the antipodes of the mind. That's how it took my name is homage to Huxley, the name of my book. It's the antipodes of the mind, the distant geography of the mind. So in that sense, ayahuasca and other things also, I talk about ayahuasca because this is what I know, but other things as well, it'll give us the opportunity to discover the hidden continents of our own mind. Okay, first I want to say that this book is a cognitive psychological book. It's almost 500 pages, and only the last chapter deals with philosophical implications, and I've written already a lot, but I intend in the future to have a sequel to this book which will be a philosophical and more speculative book. Now, I'm not an expert on Greek history, but I'm not the only one who thinks that in classical Greece there were the rituals, the mysteries of Eleusis, and there they used the kikaion. And people said that when they drank it, these rituals, these festivals lasted more than 2,000 years until Christianity abolished them in the 4th century. And usually classical professors of classical Greek literature and philosophy thought that this was only a metaphor. But beginning with Wason, who was a banker, an American banker who was the first white person to have taken the mushrooms in Mexico. He was a real intellectual and also a friend of Aldous Huxley. He suggested the idea, together with some other scholars, that the kikaion of the Eleusis mysteries was not a metaphor. It was a real psychoactive drink. And they found, again, I'm not an expert on Greek culture, but I read it makes sense. They found there in the valley, because we know where it was. It's an archaeological site today. And there grow there a kind of wheat that has fungi growing on it, which has molecules very similar to LSD. So we don't have a direct proof, but it makes lots of sense to think that that was used there. Now, we do know, as an historical fact, that Plato participated in you could participate only once in your lifetime. Any Greek citizen could do it, free citizen. And we know that Plato did it. And when we look at Platonian metaphysics, now there is a last part of the Cave of Plato that usually people don't mention. But at the end of the text, there is a cave, and everybody sees only the shadows, and the man there is asked to step behind and look at the light. He sees the light, and then he doesn't want to go back, so they have to kick him to go back to your own world, And this is usually not mentioned, but that's the end of the story. That he's kicked back because people see this light, and it's so fantastic. And they have to also to know to go back. I'll tell you, there is in the Talmud, in the Jewish culture, there is a very famous passage of 4 people who went into the garden. The garden means the esoteric world. It's the garden of the Kabbalah, of esoteric knowledge. And these were 4 first-rate rabbis. All are historical figures. One entered and died. The second entered, and these are not little boys, these are grand figures. The second entered and became crazy. The third entered, came back, but decided he'd begin a new religion. Or maybe he became an atheist. And only one of them, that's the way it says, entered in peace and returned in peace. Because this experience is not only to enter and to have the experience, but also to know how to come back in peace and what you make out of it. For example, the most famous, I said that in Brazil, as you know, because now it's also in Holland, there are Christian churches, Brazilian churches, that it's not the Christianity of the Vatican, but it's a mixed Christianity that took ayahuasca elements and Catholic elements, also Afro-Brazilian elements together. And the most famous church of this is called Santo Diamond. How did it happen? A black man, half-slave, who worked as a simple rubber plantation worker in the 20s and 30s in the Amazon. He met Indians, because the Indians didn't want to show this to white people. But that man was black. The Indians didn't think that he was black but Catholic. So they gave him ayahuasca. And he drank it. And he drank it, not the first time, but at one point for 8 consecutive days alone. This is amazing, in the forest. Eating just a bowl of, it's not rice, but something similar to rice and water. And he had a vision of, he called either the Lady of Ayahuasca or the Queen of the Forest, or he called her also the Virgin Mary, telling him to found a new religion. And simple worker, and he made a religion that is now in Holland, and recently it got a legal status in Spain, and it might conquer the world. So he made a religion. Another person, an Indian, may decide after this that he'll become a healer to cure people of those diseases. And the important thing is also he entered in peace. It means that he entered when he was already prepared. Like in the Jewish tradition, you say that you cannot study Kabbalah until you are 40 years old. Neoplatonism, I think it's of the Western philosophies, it's the most similar to what one sees with ayahuasca. But of all human philosophies, I think the most similar is the Vedanta, the classical Indian, not Indian from the Amazon, but Indian from India philosophy. There is the Rig Veda, which is the oldest of the Vedas. And they, like in Greece, they sing of a magic drink that they drink, soma, and they describe what they saw. And again, professors of India culture say this is a metaphor. But I read the Greek Veda only after I knew ayahuasca. It's very, very similar. And they say we drank the soma and we met the gods. But a good ayahuasquero is a person that knows to function both up there and here. I give you an example. We were only 5 people, but really in the forest, deep in the virgin Amazonian forest. And the ayahuasca was very strong. And at one point, the shaman said, we have to stop because he sees that it will rain. There are thunders and there will be a storm. We cannot remain like this in the middle of the jungle with a storm. So we were all in different places, and he let us go. We walked for 40-45 minutes to a place that was shelter from the rain, and it rained. So this is a good shaman. He's not a guru, he's not a mystic, he's a person who can function in both dimensions. You know, we have a very sad situation in the Amazon now, that they cut the forest and they even kill the people, or they destroy the habitat of the people. And the Indians who lived really like hunters, they don't exist anymore. The Indians there are the poorest of the poor. They live, the cheapest labor, man labor. So today, the main functions of ayahuasca are again 2. One, the religious one, but the other one is healing, is medicinal. By contrast, the medicinal folk medicine, herbal medicine use of ayahuasca is very strong today, especially not in Brazil, but in Peru. Poor people who don't have the access, the financial access to the government hospitals, to Western medicine, they go regularly to ayahuasqueros for healing. Yeah.